All right, well, welcome everybody. This is the June meeting of the Skagit Valley and Whidbey NMRA Clinic. Welcome aboard. This is our last clinic of the normal clinic season. With our last clinic, we're going to talk about the last car on the train, which is the Caboose. We have a cornucopia of various presenters to show off some models and some of their techniques and stuff. What I think is probably my second favorite thing on the railroad, other than locomotives, is the Caboose. First of all, I'd really like to thank all of the folks that volunteered. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think we have like 8 or 9 presenters. I'll start off with my own. I model an ON30. We used Bachmann rolling stock. So this is just a out-of-the-box Bachmann Caboose. I kit bashed the roof and made an offset cupola and then did some backwoods logging weathering to it. It's survived many shows. Bachmann stuff is pretty robust. Basic weathering. I use kind of a 2-part technique where I primer the model first and then let that dry. And then I spray hairspray on it. And then I spray the color coat over the top and let that dry. And then with the hairspray underneath, it kind of makes it easier to peel the paint off of your color coat. This is another Bachmann chassis with Mount Blue laser cut kit body. So the only thing you have to use from the Bachmann Caboose is the chassis, the wheel set, and you have the footboards here, all the original Bachmann stuff, but everything else is all part of the Mont Bleu kit. It's all laser cut, comes with the glazing. I put these boards right here in this window because that's where the toilet's at. Made a little privacy area. That's also where the battery is stored for my lights. So speaking of lights, so the way that I did the lights in this one, you have various methods that you can use, like using track pickup. But what we find is that if your track's dirty, then your lights flicker as you go along the track. Sometimes you can put a single function or a dual function decoder in there. That works okay. I didn't want to mess with having wipers on my wheel sets or anything like that. So I just went with a battery powered LED, and what I'm using is a reed switch to turn the LED on and off. So the reed switch, the way it works is you just use a magnet. You position a magnet close to the switch and it turns it on. You flip the magnet over and position it next to the switch again and it turns it off. Pretty simple. Circuitron makes those reed switches. They're the same people that make the Tortoise. The lights I use are the Tomar lights, and then the lighting kit that I had over here, that's where I got the battery holder and the wiring and stuff. This is just a picture of Caboose with lights off, my fat fingers over there with the kitchen magnet turning the lights on. So I put the reed switch right where the smoke jack is at, so I know where it is, within a half an inch of that smoke jack, and it'll flip the switch. Kind of an interesting way to turn lights on and off. With the LEDs inside of the lamps there, that little watch battery lasts a pretty long time. So I've had that in there for over a year now, running it still bright as it ever was. So, and it never flickers because it's a completely independent power. All right, last thing I have here is, this is a drawing from Narrow Gauge Gazette 97. Is an Al Armitage drawing. And I found it interesting. It's like, this would be a pretty good little backwoods caboose or shack. I think other people have built this as well, because I've seen this type of model in other places. I scratch built my own version of that. This is in ON30. I used a small flat car from now defunct Boulder Valley Models. They used to make resin kits. I think it's about a 12-foot flat car, and then scratch built the structure on top. And just did some minor weathering to it. There's a little hooks right here for the ladder, and put a little doorknob on there with chopping off the head of a pin. Of course, there's some nuts and bolts down there to hold the skid together. Then I put an interior in the model, a little stove and some pots and pans and stuff. Some of these things I made from automotive plastic kits, just in my parts bin. Like this is probably a hubcap or something from a car kit. Took some photos of posters and magazines and placed those in there just for some visual interest over on the right. But, just put some little doodads on a shelf just to add some interest. And I got an NMRA AP Merit Award for this to go towards my Rolling Stock Achievement Award. Fun little project. That's all of my caboose stuff. All right. Next is Phil.
Well, all right, everybody. Roundhouse Caboose Kit. I wanted to show everybody how easy these things are to really kit bash. This started out as a 36-footer. It's now 25. I didn't change anything out of the kit other than the KD couplers and the KD trucks. Something I did do was that when I glued the pieces and cut them, I did it all at a different spot, so the cuts would overlap and you wouldn't have anything that would be in the same line so that it could come apart. Like this one's one here and then offset back right here on this car is this cut on the door. And then underside, you can see that I've gone from over there at the door down across in here so that it seems like it would be stronger to me. That's all I got. I just wanted to show how easy it really is to kit bash one of these old roundhouse cars, the cabooses especially.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil. All right. So next up is Ted. Ted, I think I just made you a co-host.
All right. When Rich sent out his notice, I responded I could show him my unbuilt kit collection and a couple of works in progress. And he wrote back that I was signed up. These kits and these little green boxes, I bought them down at Hobby Smith in Portland a number of years ago. There's no brand name on these kits. Some guy down there in Oregon or Northern California got a laser cutter and decided to put out these kits. Very nice instructions. They are very well done. He did 3 different series of Northern Pacific cabooses, 1200, 1600, and 1700. This is one of the 4 kits I bought that I've got partially complete, work in progress. The interesting thing about it is he did end railings in laser cut wood, and the end steps are built up. Those steps are actually overlapping layers. So it's kind of interesting. He did absolutely as much as he could with the laser cutter. Then these are quite familiar looking to you, the American Model Builders laser kits, the Great Northern Cabooses. You can now guess what my 2 favorite railroads are. And this is when it's got partially built. Probably one of the most interesting parts of building these kits was these ladders. The vertical legs of the ladder are fiber material, laser board, or whatever they cut it. They're laser cut out, and they're laser cut holes for the wire. And then they give you brass wire to bend and put in the hole to make the ladders. So this is how they turned out. They gave you extra parts so you could practice, which I think was an excellent idea. But I'm pretty pleased with the results. I mean, camera shot up this close, they don't look that great, but with some paint, I think they're going to look great. And here's a close-up view of the American Model Builder kit. They're pretty nice kits. They supply plastic or cast resin end steps and underframe. And depending on which production run you buy, you may get a different underframe. Some of them, they give you an Athearn frame and with instructions to kit bash. There's another version, which I think is this one, has cast resin end platforms and steps, and then some plastic parts to glue together to make the underframe. And then these are a couple other kits I have. The Northeastern also did the Shorty Great Northern Caboose. The bigger box, this Northwest kit, one I bought at the Boeing swap meet, like 20, 30 years ago. I don't remember. This has been sitting on my shelf for a long time. But this was a resin kit for the bigger caboose, the 30-footer. Great Northern had 2 versions of them, one with plywood sides and another with board siding. This is the wooden board siding version. One of these days, I'll be brave enough to put it together. You see the price on it. That's the price I paid. And that was a number of years ago, so it was a fairly dear price at the time. The only other photo I have to share is a photo of a prototype caboose. These were some, Great Northern built a series of these with the heavy-duty wooden underframes so they could push trains through Cascade Tunnel with their big R2 articulateds. This is sort of a dream project to scratch build a model of this. Probably will figure out how to do the underframe and then use either the Northeastern or the laser kit wooden superstructure. That's pretty much all I have.
Awesome. Thanks, Ted. Yeah, $42 40 years ago for a caboose.
About 20 years ago, but yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Next up, we have Lee Marsh.
So I'm going to come at this from a little different angle. I don't have any scratch built stuff, kit bashed. It's all store bought, but I'm going to show you what you can do once you've got your models built, how you might photograph them using Helicon's Focus software I think Photoshop also offers this same sort of software. All tonight is attention to the well-loved caboose. What these programs do is stack various photos together that have different focal lengths, and so they have different portions of them in focus. The programs stitch them together. Here's a shot on my layout. As I said, a store-bought, this is a brass Challenger Great Northern Caboose. And you can see from the steps on the caboose, which are right near the camera, all the way to the backdrop and the pusher set over to the left, everything is in focus. And the cool thing about this is the way your eye works. When you look at something in nature, I'm not sure everything's in focus everywhere, but as soon as you shift your eye to a subject, it's in focus. Your eye is such an amazing instrument. This software helps you duplicate that, and it'll just transform photos of your layout. So let me show you how this photo was put together. This is actually a composite of about 8 photos. I'll step you through a handful of those 8. This is the first photo that was in focus near to the camera. You can see the steps of the caboose in focus, but the Herald and the Great Northern lettering is not in focus. The next photo picks that up. Another photo beyond this, you see the covered hopper now in focus, but yet the GS gun and the lumber loads ahead are not, but in this photo they are. And then finally, the helper set, the backdrop, the scenery in the far distance, all in focus. And so when you put this into a composite, this is what the program does. And I use this Helicon Focus Lite. You can purchase it, I think, for about $30 for a 1-year license, or $100 or something for a lifetime license. I think Photoshop also has this capability now. I wouldn't be surprised if in the near future iPhones will be able to do this, and maybe there's some ways to do that with iPhones already, but this is what I've been using to do this same thing. And then I edit the photos with Photoshop elements, maybe cropping or lightening some areas on the caboose. In the previous photo, you saw this seam in the backdrop where I hadn't taped the masonite. Can get rid of that. So the two programs combined really help to kind of kick your photography up a notch. Looking at how you do this, I've got on my layout, I've got hatches I can drop down so I can put a tripod in there, put a camera on a tripod. One thing you have to do is have the camera not move while you take the sequence of photos. So the tripod allows you to do that. You can see I've got a fill light off to the side where you might lighten drivers or dark areas on locomotives or the sides of trains. Don't have to do that, but that's just an additional technique. What I did with the photo that I first showed you, and with the next photo I'm going to show you, I took my camera and took a piece of plexiglass and drilled a hole in it so I could bolt it to the bottom of the camera, nice wide base. And then I use these little rubber mats, which are just rubber mats that you buy to take caps off of jars, cut them in half. Once you put the camera down on this, it doesn't slide, so you can keep it in one position. And what this shows is you need a camera with this program that has manual focus. You can use a light setting. I'm using f4.5, so you don't have to chase a really high f-stop to get a lot of light in, but to get additional depth of field, you can use a light setting that works with the lighting in your room. You can run longer exposures if you need to. So that makes things really simple. This is the way I take the photos. This is the composite from that setup that I just showed you. You know, it's pretty cool to have a whole line of cabooses, Cabeese, all in focus here in one shot. Even down, you can see the R2, you can read the number on the cab of the R2 there in the distance. The technique is really powerful. Some other things you can do. This is a photo that was simulated as being taken from the cupola of a caboose. And I used a transfer caboose that didn't have a cupola, so I could put my camera up behind it. But you get the idea, looking out over the running board of the covered hopper and the train there as the reefer block passes on the left. I didn't come up with this idea entirely on my own. Here's the photo I just showed you. This, by the way, was published in Model Railroader in June 17 and Trackside Photos. So this is helpful in getting like your author achievement award. But I took the idea from a Philip Hastings photo that was first published in Trains in 1958. And I think it was republished. I think I took this photo out of Trains of the 1950s, a Kalmbach publication that's come out recently. I thought the perspective was really cool, so I tried to duplicate it with the photo. And that's been kind of a technique of mine, of stealing in a way what really good photographers in the real world have done with real trains. Let me kind of show you maybe this sort of effect. This photo I like. It's a great shot of the caboose, all the reefers are in focus, looks cool. But really, you could only get this photo from a drone. You see the retaining wall. There's nowhere practically you could get the photo in the real world. A better technique in my mind is to get in close, like this photo, same location, different train, but I'm down low. You can do this with the tripod. If you're looking underneath the train, generally you see some area beyond the wheel sets here. This puts you at a level that's human scale and makes a much more compelling photo, I think, than the previous one. Looks good, but this looks more realistic to me. The marker lamps don't hurt either. Just some techniques that you can do is, once you have the ability to get in tight to your models and take photos that have full depth of field, you really get a whole different perspective of what your layout can look like. That's what I've got tonight.
Excellent photos, Lee.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, those look great. So next up we have Gary Jordan.
So I model in O scale and S scale. I just thought I'd run through the roster of what I have. This little Pensy bobber I built about 1996, I think. Just found it in a box. It had a couple of castings, the directions, the plans, and decals. But I thought it was interesting. I didn't have a layout at the time, so I thought, well, I'll just put it together. So I did. I have the lighted markers. I just put in reflective plex windows, so you can't see inside, but they look a little weird, but what the heck, it's just for display. And like Rich, I added a battery box underneath this with a AAA battery to keep it going. It's basically scratch built. All of the brass was done by hand, and it's O scale, O standard gauge. I don't use it on the layout. Actually, I do use this one. This is a little brass model that Dick Garberson gave me a few years ago, and I just painted it up and put some lettering on it just to have something to go on my my Burlington branch that interfaces with Golden and the CNS. So this is my token standard gauge caboose on the layout. It does have a little red light in the top. I don't know if that's prototypical, but now I had one laying around, thought, what the heck? But it runs pretty well. It sits around most of the time. CNS, this is a kit that is pretty decent. It's all plastic and went together pretty well. Colorado and Southern, again, a bobber. And this one has all of the brake rigging, which kind of became a problem. I had to fiddle around with it to keep it from dragging on the tracks. And it does have plastic wheels. I can live with that. Again, it's ON3. I have another brass CNS caboose like this, but it's so heavy I don't run it very often. My layout is the Gilpin Tram. This caboose, I have 3 of these. I made those again from scratch from plans in Mallory Hope Farrell's book about the Gilpin Tram. I built 3 of them basically because I needed a place to put the speakers. My chaise didn't have enough room in them, so I built these Cabeese to have a big speaker in it so I could get some decent sound out of the chips. And it worked out pretty well. Since then, of course, things have gotten smaller decoders and small speakers in the locomotive. So now the caboose is detached from the locomotive, so I can just have a regular caboose going on. So that's my rolling stock for the layout. Actually, I have a little Christmas layout that I run S-scale around. I've got into S-scale a long time ago. If anybody is into S-scale, you'll recognize this as a Reading little caboose that ran on American Flyer. But I converted it to standard S-scale, and again added railings, ladders, and stuff in the back, decent couplers. and just lettered it up for the Rio Grande, one of my favorite railroads, of course. So this runs pretty well just for the Christmas layout, so it's no big deal. I also run, that's S standard gauge, and this is SN3. I built this back in the 80s. Again, is lettered for the East Jordan and Southern that ran up in Wisconsin. But I use it down on the layout under the Christmas tree, and it keeps everybody company. Again, railings and stuff out of brass. It was a nice kit. It went together really well. Nothing hot on the bottom, just the suggestion of brake rigging, all of that stuff. The last caboose I have on the roster, this is SN2, and I use HOM3 track and wheels and side frames and everything for these. Again, it runs under the Christmas tree, but it's a Gilpin Caboose, just like the larger brothers in O scale. It's again all scratch built using HOM3 couplers. They work really well. That's my roster. Thanks, guys.
That's pretty cool. I was looking at the participant screen. So Ron, you're up.
Okay. I want to talk about my ON30 logging caboose. I've always been kind of fascinated with logging cabooses, I guess because of their utilitarian style. My own railroad is logging oriented, centered on a shingle mill. And I finally decided to build this caboose when I needed a passenger carrying car to complete my AP car certificate. I did quite a bit of research, or had been watching quite a few articles and photos of logging Cabeese over the years, but I was most influenced, I think, by an article in the 92 Gazette by Charles Doan. In any case, I settled on this freelance side door caboose. It was kind of like the West Side Lumber Company, but not faithfully. The basic platform is a chassis for a string of flat cars that I had built earlier. So the caboose body is just dropped on this flat car base. A few of my own basics about scratch building. I mill all my own strip wood. It's so convenient to have whatever size I need when I need it without having to have an enormous inventory. And I always add some kind of grain, sometimes with a plumber's brush, which is a very stiff wire brush used to clean the copper pipe before it's soldered. A small screwdriver tip is probably the most handy tool, but I also wanted to show you this Exacto graining tool. Some of you may be using something similar. It's just a stack of about 6 Exacto blades epoxied into the end of a wooden handle. And if you use the dull side of the blades, scrape down strip wood, it gets a pretty nice grain effect. And then before I put anything together, I always dirty it up with some kind of alcohol stain. I've typically used shoe dye in my alcohol stains, but I've experimented a little bit with India ink. Recently, I decided to try the Hunterline stains, and I really like them, although for my purposes, they need to be thinned a little bit. And then for this caboose, in addition to beating up the wood a little bit that way, I dry brushed the outside of the sheathing with boxcar red and the inner sides of the sheathing with aged white. Those are flocal terms, but I think you can duplicate those colors these days with water-based paints. And I always use Aleene's tacky glue. I think it's fantastic. There was an interesting discussion on the National Narrow Gauge group last night about Aleene's, and some people never heard of it, and others thought it was the end of the world. I couldn't live without it. It's just wonderful, and in part, something that I haven't heard mentioned too much. One of the things I like about it is that if you make a mistake, you can remove it, you can change. And I use jigs whenever I can to get uniform kind of assembly. So I assembled or made this styrene jig to assemble the 2x4 framing for the caboose. And then mounted it on the platform, flat car platform, and applied the pre-stained 1x6 sheathing with these results. And then I used a similar approach for the cupola, made a jig and built up the 2x4 framing. Here I had the siding slightly overlap the window openings so that there would be a place to support the windows. And then I glazed them with Lexan. and used PSA, pressure sensitive adhesive for that. That's a marvelous thing too, which for putting in windows, it's really great. It's kind of like contact cement, but less strong, and it avoids the problem of squeeze out on the windows. Then the roofs were made with over roof joists shaped from 2x10s. And 1x6 sheathing was applied. And then the technique I've used for tar paper simulation is to stretch a little tissue paper over the surface and then paint it with, or slop it on with grimy black paint. And the paint becomes the glue, and tissue paper comes out looking pretty much like tar paper. The doors were all strip wood, and the ladders are strip wood. The sliding doors have styrene tracks behind the wooden valances so that they can be moved relatively easily. And then I used boxcar hardware on these doors, the slides and stops and lock and so forth. The exterior ladder has wire rungs, and the interior ladder has just 2x4 rungs. This doorknob, I discovered some bridle lace pinheads at the, I believe at Joann's, that have a diameter that's exactly comparable to a 3-inch doorknob. I've used them in lots of projects. For underbody detail, I used nylon truss rods with Grant Line queen posts and turnbuckles, and then Grant Line brake components, except the clevises are from San Juan Car Company. Piping was phosphor bronze wire. These trucks are standard caboose trucks. Looking at the rear end, I guess it's the front end actually. The brake Grant Line, lift bar, and the air hose, the nut bolt washer casting, and the stirrup steps are all Grant Line. These couplers are H.O. McHenry couplers in generic boxes, and the end railings were just made from bent wire. The connectors here are simply a little piece of styrene, then a short segment of insulation from fine wire swept over the ends. This is an interior overview showing on this side is a high cabinet, which had the observer's bench on it for writing in the cupola. There's a workbench over here, a lounge bench in this corner, and a stove here. This is another view of the cabinet, which, although looks a little crude in this close-up photo, it works well. It's just a wooden block with strip wood doors and styrene hinges and wire handles. This photo shows just some junk box clutter on the workbench. The shovel and broom are both commercial castings. The lunchbox was just carved from a piece of balsa and with a metal handle. The leather cover on the lounge bench is done the same way as the tar paper roofs, with Kleenex painted with brown paint in this case. And then I used like the tip of a small Phillips head screwdriver to touches on it. This stove came from a Bachmann coach. It's a styrene heat shield around the stove with nut bolt and washer detail. The coal bucket and shovel and coffee pot are all commercial castings, I think from Berkshire Valley. And then I finished by putting 1x3 trim around all the doors and at the corners. The trucks and wheels were painted with grimy black and rusted. I used some Dr. Benz weathering. It's just a alcohol solution, and a dry brushing of dark rust, which is a very interesting mixture of 1/3 roof brown and 2/3 rust. This is another, this is my slash burner on my cedar shingle mill that I painted with this mixture called dark rust. It makes a nice warm rust brown for an area where you need a lot of rust. Then I added some red to the caboose body with pan pastels and lightly airbrushed it with flocal dust on the lower portions. And then I did some more weathering with pan pastels. And these are 4 different perspectives of the result. That's it.
All right, that looks great. So that was an award-winning model, wasn't it?
Well, yes, in a local contest, for the PNR in Tacoma, I think it was in 14 or 16, and it got an achievement award, 113 points on the achievement award. I think that's a pretty good score.
Yeah.
Nice model, Ron.
Thank you.
All right. Cool stuff. All right. Next up, we got Jake.
I've loved cabooses and building cabooses for years. I was trying to remember how many I kit bashed or scratch built or whatever over the years, and it's well over 30 and maybe in the 40s or 50s. A lot of them I've given away or sold to friends for a nominal price. Experience with my uncle, who was a CNR conductor in Melville, Saskatchewan. So he took me for a little ride when I was not very old. So I guess that stimulated my caboose thing. And a train isn't a train without a caboose on the end. I've just taken that from all my inventory of photos. This is the BC Hydro Railway Caboose, which was built in their shops in New Westminster, British Columbia. And they were built from scratch, basically. This is the photo that I did the first one with, probably back in about 2004. I tried to estimate the angle that the photograph was taken at, or I measured it or calculated it incorrectly. And my caboose came out about 1.5 foot too short. But I ran it for a long time. But that's the styrene model there you see is basically my scheme of how I built them. I built a frame and then put the sides on it and then the windows in and then the roof. And this is a little different shot of it. It shows the end with end platform. I don't spend a lot of time in the underbody because I can't see it when I'm running trains. So I know Ron did an excellent job in his underbody. This is the top view of the same caboose, looking down at it. And what I've done here, I've made it so that the underframe and the body can be separated with that screw in the center. And it's just the taps, 256 tap hole, and the screw in the bottom fastens the body to the underframe. This is an example of two styles of cabooses I did. I experimented with from scratch building, which took some time. I thought, well, I've got a bunch of out there in wide vision cabooses. What if I tried to modify those? So basically what you can see here is your standard Athearn caboose on the top, the kit bash version at the bottom for the BC Hydro caboose. And it didn't turn out too badly. The one thing that was a benefit there was I didn't have to build the steps, which takes some time, but they weren't exactly right compared to the BC Hydro drawings that I had. So actually I should have mentioned that I did have the drawings of the BC Hydro caboose I've got from the engineering department at BC Hydro some years ago. So starting with a stock Athearn underframe probably helps a bit. Photo on the top is the Athearn kit bash. The one on the lower, the white styrene. You can see on the bottom one how the steps are canted inwards towards the trucks, and that's actually how the steps work. Whereas the Athearn ones are straight down. When it's running, it's not really that noticeable. It could be quite easily modified by just cutting that angle on the bottom of the Athearn kit. And that's a series of 3 of them that I built for myself or friends over the years. I've got the turquoise, blue, green one and the yellow one in my possession still. The other one's gone. And I've done about 4 or 5 of the yellow and green versions I've given away or sold to friends. This is a Roundhouse Caboose Kit. And I think one of the other gentlemen earlier started with a Roundhouse Caboose Kit. And I wanted to make a Toronto, Hamilton, Buffalo caboose for one of our club members here in the Sunshine Coast, Motor Railway Club member. So I had this laying around, so I thought, well, I get some pictures of the TH&B. And so this is how I started it. I had to move one window. That's pretty much it. And that's the roof shot. I had to modify the roof. And the ladders were on the wrong side. I had to change the ladder side. And that's the end railing. Really just stock. I just had to do a few details on it around the boardwalk up in the area here. And that was the final product that I did for Dave. Unfortunately, Dave passed away about a year after I gave it to him. So it's still in the club layout as part of his memory. Now, this is a prototype caboose on Vancouver Island and Canfor logging operation at Wasps, British Columbia. I've been up there several times. The first time was 1986, and I went back up in 2010 or 12 with some friends, and we scouted around and got some great pictures. I've got some good friends out of Campbell River that probably went up there once a month. We actually had a cab ride and the whole works. It was great. So I wanted to do this caboose, and there it is in one of the Canfor logging operation trains up there. That, unfortunately, there was an accident a few years ago when that line has all been pulled up now. This is my version of that caboose, and it's just basically styrene. It's got straight black primer paint on it so far. But one of the things that you may or may not notice is both the brake wheels are different, the wheel itself, and that's exactly what was on that 4103. So I thought, well, I'll copy that. And the underbody, as I said, I don't spend a lot of time in the underbody detail because I can't see it. As long as the appliances are there and a few airlines. This again was a scratch built underbody. You can see I've made the steps, and I used that styrene angle to make it, and it seemed to work pretty good. This one here is an O-scale caboose that I built based on the CPR prototype for an O-scale member of our club 15 years ago. And Rod had quite an O-scale collection at home and a little layout. And he built a very nice little switching layout of it at our Railroad Club facilities. And he passed away, I think, in about 2005. So the club has since sold all the tapes. I kept this one just as a memory to Rod. And this one here by Raven River is my fictitious logging railway. There used to be a Raven River Lumber Company just north of Campbell River. And the first time I saw that, I saw the Raven on a log. I thought, that's a great name for a logging company. So that's what will happen when I build my layout. I always stuck with that. This caboose actually is based on I believe, the Weyerhaeuser White River Division down in Washington State. And in 1986, when we did the WAS trip from the interior BC, two friends and myself, we ended up down there, and back in the bush, we found this old beat up caboose. Nobody had a tape measure to measure anything. So what we did, we measured the board with a piece of paper and counted the boards, and that's how I got the length. I guessed at the height, and I guessed at the end details. There was no end railings or anything on it, but I think it's a Weyerhaeuser White River Division, and I think, as I recall, it had number 1 on it. Just could barely read the number on that. And this one here is built from drawings of a friend of mine of a PG wooden caboose, and it's done in styrene. That's one. No, this one might be done in wood, and it's dry transfer lettering on it. Back in 2018, the Model Railroaders of BC held a conference at Simon Fraser University this year. Some of you, I think, gentlemen, attended the virtual meet. I was asked if I would put all my caboose collection in and display it. If you go from the top side where the shay is, the Raven River shay, that one caboose in behind it with a little, like a work caboose with a small cabin on it, that was based on a kit that was developed by the Northwest Club in North Vancouver. And they sold the kits to make money. And one of my friends was a member of the club here, and he gave it to me, so I just built it. The CP Rail caboose is a kit-fast Athearn 2 cabooses glued back together in the right length with the right window placement. The green one is the BC Rail caboose, wide vision. The one in front of that is my little logging caboose. It's a freelance. It was in a Model Railroader magazine in the 80s or 90s. The little Raven River number 4 is the White River one again. Then there's a CP and a CN. Those are both wooden kits, I think probably Junico or Taylor. The CN locomotive is a GS 413 kit bash from an Athearn, and the caboose in behind that is a scratch built from drawings. On the right-hand side, there's the BC Hydro cabooses. The only picture I have of the Canfor logging caboose, the little yellow one. Then there's another Junico CP caboose just to the left of the little yellow logging caboose. Below that is CN, is the Point St. Charles caboose, which I scratch built from drawings in one of the magazines. I can't remember which one, 10 or 12 years ago. And that's a shot from the other side of it. There's the O-scale caboose, the CP based. This is a CPR wooden ore car that they used on a trail, British Columbia, in the early 1900s. And this is actually a narrow gauge car based on the Southern Pacific, and it was part of the O-scale layout at the club. And that's it, I think.
That's a fantastic collection you got there.
Yeah, as I said, I've been doing these for a lot of years. But the first wooden kit I ever got, I got a Junico kit, probably in about 1983 or 4, and a caboose kit, and I built that. And
all right, thanks, Jake. That was interesting. I like a lot of that Canadian logging stuff because it's definitely unique, a little bit different than what we have down here. Okay, next up is Terry Kanzor. What you got for us, Terry? Are you gonna just show off?
Oh, here I am. All right. Well, anyway, I've got this caboose right here. This is one of the ones that, well, actually, it looked like this to start. And I changed it around to make it look like something that I wanted on my layout. And anyway, it's kind of smooth sides now, you know, with the Great Northern Shield and stuff on it. It's just a good old, works on the layout when I have a layout right now. This one right here is with a little wooden kit. I'm not sure where I got it or when I built it, but I did some weathering on it.
That looked good. Did some good improvising there. Okay, thanks, Terry.
You bet.
Next up, we got Tom Barrett. Are you ready to go?
I think so. This was built from plans, kind of plans that were in Railroad Model Craftsman in the 1960s. And I built this while I was going to school. And instead of studying psychology or economics, I decided that I would build a outside braced caboose. Main structure is basswood that is hand scribed. And then the braces were balsa wood. The steps, railings are brass rod cut and soldered. I did not have a hobby shop in the city I was going to school at, so I had to scrounge just about everything. In fact, the vent that's on there, let's see if I can point that out. That little vent there, that is a pellet from a pellet gun. The stack was brass tubing, K&S brass tubing that I fashioned, and the steps are made from brass angle that I soldered together, and of course the trucks and the couplers are commercial. And this ran for quite a while at East Bay Model Engineers in Oakland, California. And I think that's all I have.
That's a nice looking model there, Tom. Especially back when there was not very many commercial products available, completely scratch built.
Yeah, this is O-scale, 2-rail.
When did you say you built it?
Well, since I graduated in '68, it was sometime before that, because I remember doing it on my desk in my dorm room.
And you still have it and it still runs. So very good build there.
Yeah, well, it still runs, but I don't have any track to run it on. I'm back to HO now. When I moved up into the Seattle area, I decided that I had to get out of O-scale. Actually, I was an ON30 at the time. I was an ON30 starting about '74. And that was all kit bashed and or scratch built, but nothing was very nice looking. It was quickly put together. But that was a lot of fun doing it at that time. So that's all I have.
Excellent. Thanks, Tom. All right. Next up, we got Alan Murray.
Well, I have two O-scale examples of some cabooses I have. This is a W&R Enterprises brass caboose, which has a funny story how I ended up getting it. So there were two of these offered for sale. They'd been in the boxes forever. When they were constructed, I don't know, but this is a 24-foot wood caboose. They had two numbers that were sold, apparently. There was a 1663 and a 1708. And I said to myself when I first saw these advertised that, well, I want the old one, the 1603. And so I thought I'd made a purchase. And the next day I get this email and said something about this thing's been sold. Would you like to consider something else? And I go, wait a minute, I thought I bought it. So I quickly dove in, found the 1708 and purchased that. Well, come to find out, all eBay was telling me was that, yeah, it's been sold, but it still had been sold to me. So now I have two brass cabooses. Anyway, it's really nicely done. The doors open, they're spring loaded. The detail on the outside is really nice. Give you a couple more views. Catwalks are really nice. And then MTH had a series where they had a 3-truck shay, some log cars, a bobber caboose. This one I've converted to 2-rail. So far, I've got the couplers on. I've got the wheel sets correct so that I could do something. Rich had a very good idea about the lighting because I haven't put any wipers on this yet, but I'm going to have to take it apart again and work on the lights and do something. The interesting thing is that they just use a bulb inside and that'll put light in the side lamps, but you can only see it from one direction. I'm building a series of log cars that are a little more prototypical than the ones that MTH had. Give you a couple more views. It's a pretty basic model for O-scale, but it looks kind of cute. I've got it sitting on my windowsill with one of the log cars next to it, and it looks pretty good. So an interesting thing about cabooses is if anybody's ever gone to brasstrains.com, it's interesting that a year and a half ago, there were so many cabooses for sale, especially in HO scale. It was like they couldn't give them away. And currently, you almost can't find a caboose for sale in HO scale, especially in Northern Pacific or Great Northern. They had a sale just the other day. The only painted cabooses they had, other than a steel one, you know, they all got wrapped up in about 6 hours and there just aren't available. I have several cabooses that I've bought over the years in HO scale. I've got a couple of clunky Great Northern cabooses that somehow came out of somebody's estate that Rich was getting rid of for somebody. They're kind of funky. You can't have enough cabooses. That's the way I look at it. So I keep looking around and trying to find some. So that's what I got.
Awesome. Those are some nice looking models.
Thank you.
All right. That wraps up all of our presenters. Again, would like to thank everybody who volunteered. Certainly a lot of interesting models, different kinds of cabooses, plenty of prototypes to gather inspiration from, or you can just make up something. Some of the questions I had on the chat is how long does the battery last for the lights? I don't know yet. I haven't ran a battery out and it's been over a year. It's made several laps around my modules. So yeah, and the lights are only on when it's running. And I turn them off when I'm not running. And I have forgotten to turn it off before. And the next day went out and turned it off and they're still fine. Someone asked how easy it is to change the battery. That particular model I have, the whole body comes off of the chassis and then you can access the battery from inside the body. The one Gary had the battery underneath on the chassis where you could just change the battery by flipping the caboose over. It also adds some weight. Typically, cabooses need a little bit of weight. If there's any other questions, now's a good time to ask.
Rich,
Go ahead.
I have a caboose that is under development. You want to see it?
Sure.
This is a Bachmann Shorty caboose that had the really small windows in it. And I put SN3 windows in it and used an S-scale cupola on it, because it had no cupola on it when I bought it.
It looks a lot better than the stock Bachmann one, yeah. So does anybody know why the interior of the cabooses is green on most of them? Also the interior of most steam locomotives?
It's for relaxing. It's a relaxing color, so you take the stress off.
Okay.
Well, you don't want to get train sick.
Well, it's amazing that they had figured that out back in the late 1800s.
I don't know, but I would guess it's because it was cheap, the cheapest.
They needed to save the red paint for everything else. I really appreciate everybody who stepped up because it did make it a very interesting clinic with, a host of different things.